Remember the pun? Nightmare?
Yes.
Nightmare?
Yes.
On this Deltarune survey, over 2,000 people rated what they thought about over 300 Deltarune theories. My co-host and I have ratings along with text responses and old theories just to look back on. Which theories were liked? Why were some theories even made? What did they think about?
We finally come to this part. This is the category that I literally made. I started this survey because I was interested in these night theories. What do people like the most? And then I branched off more from that with other theories. This is probably one of the most talked about parts in the game. There are a bunch of them that was wrong and a bunch of them that was right. But first up, we'll start off with the just the ones that were most correct or like half right, because we kind of have to bring them up because we don't know where the game could go from here and such. Chestnut really wanted us to do that because it would be really long.
The night stuff was the most discussed topic in the theorizing space, right? And for good reason, because it's like there was basically like a starting off point for like any theories, right? It's like you pick your knight and then you're gonna base all your other theories around that. Picking your knight, it was kind of like picking a starter Pokemon. You're gonna balance the rest of your team based around your starter usually.
I didn't want it to be two separate videos at first, but I kind of realized that Chestnut's idea was better. If you disagree with it being two videos, then blame it on him. It's all his fault. Even though I'm your friend, it's all your fault.
It's your fault. You're the one who made the survey. Don't blame me.
That's how it works, you know?
You did this to yourself.
It's your fault for wanting it to be two videos. And I agreed with you. It's none of my fault.
Okay.
I'm not involved in it, okay?
Okay.
Multi-night. Specifically the version about like a group working together. This is not like the only multi-night alternative. There are a bunch of different subcategories within just one of these like multi-night directions. But this is the direction that ended up being true. And it didn't even do all that well for literally being what was true, you know?
Yeah. You'd think that the right answer would be at least a little bit more popular, but it really wasn't. Because the correct answer was kind of odd because it was multi-night, right?
I guess this one did well for a night theory because a lot of them didn't get super extremely high. A lot of them were kind of in the middle for the ones that were considered, you know, not the ones that are like, Alfie's night, you know, stuff like that.
Well, if you compare it to like only the garbage night theories that nobody believed, sure. But no, but the thing that is that like multi-night was the correct answer. But then there's the confusing element of the fact that multi-night was not one individual theory, but dozens of different theories and different interpretations with different outcomes, right? And then the specific answer that was correct was Kris Death's multi-night, right? Whether or not Carol or Asgore is also involved is yet to be seen, and also doesn't really matter because it doesn't seem like they're going to be making fountain unless Asgore does make that fountain and he is also part of the night conspiracy.
I don't think he's in on the conspiracy.
We'll see what happens in chapter 5, but as it stands right now, this is objectively the correct answer. It was Kris Death's multi-night.
Yeah. I could have picked out some weird examples there for like if people picked out this character and this character, you know? But I don't really know how I would do that here. I can maybe show something scrolling on the screen. I didn't see many people talking about this one. Sometimes the most I remember from it was Spooky Dude bringing it up in one video, like, here's a multi-night idea. Like, this wasn't the multi-night theory people liked.
The only video at all that I know about that was even close was like Kiwi Mora's video, which suggests the idea of Chris Mayer multi-night specifically. And that was super close.
That was really close. Yeah. I mean, it was a theory you had, you know, it was.
Yes, that's another thing too. The only people I ever saw suggest the idea of Kris Death's multi-night specifically were like a small handful of Kris Knighters who viewed it as like a viable alternative to Kris Knight. And those people were like myself, Kiwi Mora as well, Theory Crafter, and like one other member of my Discord server. And like that was it. Those are the only people who ever theorized about the correct answer, at least that I know of. I'm sure that there's a few other people out there that I've never met before, but for the most part, it was literally that small.
Yeah, I guess people just wanted one person to be the knight because, you know, the game was building it up as like the knight, you know, and people didn't want like two knights, the knights knights running around. And I guess it's like technically true. It's still just one character who's named the Roaring Knight, you know, but we have it two because, you know, one character making one fountain is functionally the same as the other one making it because they have like the same plan and motivations.
Yes. It's a matter of like, I think a big part of the reason why this got under discussed is the fact that it's just hard to talk about.
I guess.
Because it's like, it's hard enough to try and debate knight theories when you're just doing like solo knight stuff. You add in the element of, oh, there's multiple knights and stuff, and then everything just gets way more confusing and like harder to talk about. And when you bring up multi-knight, there's also all that baggage of the other knight theories and people's own like view of what they think you mean when you say multi-knight, right?
Yeah, it would be hard. Yeah, it is hard to talk about. The summary I wrote on the survey was just really short. It was only like 2 sentences long. It said it would make it easier for them to reach their goal because, you know, it's 2 people. And like, I guess we'll bring that up later again. It does allow for better planning.
And I do want to like break it down for people a little bit and explain what we mean when we say this was correct, because I'm sure some people are gonna like disagree and be like, no, multi-knight wasn't correct, it was just Death Knight, right? Just because Kris is working with her doesn't mean that they're a knight. Multiple knights, Kris and Death, that's just kind of objectively correct. There's literally a scene where Kris gets knighted. Kris literally makes a fountain. Ram explains in the lore that the fountains are based on like a game that Kris and the knight used to play as children, knight being Death. So the fountains themselves are based on their shared mutual wills of their experiences together. This is like multi-knight to a T. Even going back, right, I mentioned just a moment ago that this was one of the theories that I considered, which is true. This was like my number 2 pick by far. It was like Kris Death multi-knight specifically. There was the whole entry 17 element of this, which was really like a big part of this for me. The knight has to be at least one of the 2 people that Gasser mentions, like talks to in entry 17. And those 2 people I was very convinced was Kris and Death, and I'm still convinced that that's the case. I think that's just kind of like definitely true now. In retrospect, it makes sense that they would just both be the knight, especially when you factor in the whole Kris making a premeditated fountain and stuff. I was very convinced that the only possible answers were like Kris solo knight or Kris multi-knight. I named the theory Kris Knight +1 because it really was just the same thing as Kris Knight, but Death is also there making fountains with Kris. So yeah, like that was like a big reason why I was very confident that the answers were either like solo Kris Knight or Kris Death multi-knight. And lo and behold, it ended up being Kris Death multi-knight. And I do feel pretty confident that this is like, yes, this is a multi-knight angle under every definition of how you would define multi-knight in this context of being multiple knights working together. I try to explain what the heck Death as the knight is doing without Kris's involvement. You really can't. Like, it's pretty critical to the knight plan that Kris uses the soul to seal the fountains and also makes the chapter 3 fountain for Death. The whole plot just doesn't work without Kris's involvement, you know?
Back to me. I still have some things I've written down. One text response that I'd written down was, I'd want more foreshadowing for it in the next chapters. Well, lucky you, we already had it in chapter 2, triple truces. So that was a foreshadowing for like the whole Kris working with different people for reasons.
Yeah, I mean, that's also like true as well, because like most of the setup for the Death Knight reveal happens in chapter 3, right?
Yeah.
Like most of the stuff that like is put into the story to actually make the Death Knight reveal work happens in chapter 3. There's also like the element of like how this was all revealed, right? You get to the end of chapter 2, Kris makes the fountain, it's the Kris Knight reveal. You get a little bit further into chapter 3, and then Ram explains that the first 2 fountains, and also this one, are based off of a game that Kris used to play with a girl, right?
If you
so that
find
kind of
that
just,
dialogue.
I mean, that's like, it's very hard to miss that dialogue. You have to just not talk to Ram. Right? So you get to that dialogue, and then like, okay, well that hard confirms Kris Knight pretty much. But then it also kind of leaves room for multi-knight with that girl, who like most people are probably going to assume is Noelle, but in reality is actually Death, right? And then you get a bit further in, you know, chapter 3, and like Tenna talks about Death and how Kris thought she was super cool. And you get a bit further, and then the whole 1225 thing into like a snowy wasteland, into the Christmas tree with Toriel on top, right? It kind of like primes the mood for Death Knight's arrival. Then you get to the Tenna fight, and he just hard confirms Kris Knight with the whole like the Roaring Knight appeared and stuff.
Well, people,
and then 5 minutes later,
well, some people interpreted that line as like, oh, so Kris isn't the knight.
I don't know how the fuck you can possibly do that.
But
that's just like an absurd.
Yeah, but
that's
Kris
just wrong.
wasn't.
That's just wrong.
Well, Kris wasn't the knight though.
They're both the knight. That's the whole point of
Yeah,
the
but
scene.
Kris wasn't the knight that made the chapter 1 and 2 fountain.
That's not the point. It's like that confirms, right? Well, it confirms Kris Knight. At that point, like there's no going back from Kris Knight, right? And just because like a second Death Knight appears 5 minutes later and chops off Tenna's arms, doesn't like take away from the Kris Knight revelation to a degree. It's, hey, Kris is the knight, and then Death Knight shows up and kills Tenna and is like, oh, by the way, actually we're doing multi-knight and Death is also the knight, right? That's kind of what the reveal is, because that is a misunderstanding. You're meant to just go, oh, okay, Kris is the knight, because that's another big component of why this is definitively multi-knight, is because Tenna attributes an action performed by Kris to the knight. Right? Susie just thinks that the knight made the chapter 3 fountain. So that's also a big component of this, is how they're working together in such unison. You know, Kris does something and then the knight takes credit for it to hide the fact that Kris is a second of 2 knights, you know? So like, it's like, is Death the primary knight? Yeah. Which makes it a bit odd that Kris Knight was revealed first, I would say. And, you know, it is what it is.
I know what you're saying, but I feel like some people are going to be confused still.
I don't know. It's like, this is confusing. I would agree.
Mhm.
Toby wrote the game in an extremely confusing manner.
I wanted to like find if people said like, oh, Kris and Des under this question, because as you can see, people were asked who they thought were working together. Des is lower than Alvin, because of course, but you know, what I was looking for were just people who said like, oh, Kris, Des, and Carol, you know. If I just asked if it included Kris, Des, and Carol, like if they just included them, like 62, and just restricting it down just so it's not like gazillion characters and then Kris, Des, and Carol are there, you know, and it doesn't feel like they're just picking out a random, or if they're like picking out in the sense that, oh, okay, I think these 2 characters could be working together, but I also think these 2 characters could be working together as like a different theory or something, then you have like 26. Here are the stats for different ways people like brought up Kris, Des, and like Carol for this knight team up stuff, because maybe Carol is involved. It's a little hard to know, and maybe Carol is still the knight somehow in some weird manner. Who knows? Yeah.
I'm a little surprised that Gaster was so high up on that, higher than Kris, right? Because you look at the graph, it's like, which character do you think could be planning something together? Gaster is like the number 1 pick.
But everyone's Gaster pilled.
I guess it's like whether or not Gaster is also kind of working with the knight, like maybe. I'm just surprised that people voted Gaster like 300 more votes than Kris, because Kris literally already made a fountain, and that Kris's fountain was also premeditated.
Yeah, but some people thought they were innocent, but we'll talk about it later. Des Knight. Yeah. This is the one. Yeah. This is the big one.
This is the big one that was true, like unarguably true. Like people will argue whether or not the credibility of Kris Knight, but this one, like I'm sure a lot of people will not agree when we say multi-knight was true, but everybody will agree when we say this one was true.
This is just Asriel 2. It's just the Mother 3 stuff again, you know?
Death Knight is a very interesting theory in retrospect, and we're looking back in the chapter 2 days, because she definitely had a meaningful amount of evidence.
Yeah, and there were some followers for her, but you know, it is one of the Knight theories that did the best, you know. Vessel and Alvin and Kris did actually better, though.
Yeah, like there were Death Knighters, of course, but for the most part, Death Knight was a lot of people's simply like second pick, right? Yeah. That's how I saw it. Like a lot of people had Death Knight as like their top 3, but not necessarily like their number 1. There was also a lot of people who were like just kind of holiday nighters, where they were like, it's either Carol or Des, but I can't really pick between the 2. I saw a lot of people who were like that as well.
Yeah. It's probably not Carol. Sorry.
Yeah.
It did ever so slightly better than Carol Knight here, but it's still definitely somewhat likely to some degree. I don't know.
I mean, Carol Knight has like a huge contradiction that's like very blatant.
Yeah, we'll get to
much
that.
More definitive than anything
we'll
people
get to
ever
that.
argued against with Kris Knight. But like,
we'll get to that.
When it came to Death Knight, right? There was kind
she was
of
seen
like
as the lost girl. She was seen as the lost girl, and that was kind of a problem for me and a lot of people. Even though this theory wasn't one of the horrible Knight theories, I thought this one had a lot of story potential.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. When it came to like the direct evidence in the game for Death Knight in the chapter 2 days, it was really just that one cutscene with Noelle where she's like, oh, Death told me she wanted to bring me to a city one time, and then like the baseball moon, and that was mostly it. Like anything else was kind of very like kind of grasping at strawsy. It felt like, I remember people would argue about like the guitar strings on Spamton or something like that.
Yeah.
Being like, oh, the wires are actually guitar strings. And even with Death Knight being true, I'm still like, are we sure that's like real?
Well, looking back in hindsight, there are definitely more moments where I feel like, oh, that makes more sense because Des made it. Like the random Christmas music from Sweet Captain Cakes. Remember that?
Well, they play that because Noelle's on screen. They play that because of Noelle. So
okay.
I don't think that one was Death Knight stuff.
Okay.
I mean, looking back in chapter 1, there's like Clover.
Yeah, that. But you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, the thing is, and the thing is, when it came to like Death Knight counter evidence back in the chapter 2 days, things that people would bring up to argue against a Death Knight, primarily it was mostly just a matter of the Spamton sweepstakes and stuff was setting her up to be the find her lost girl, which, like, if she was being set up to be, like, the lost girl that needs to be found within the narrative, that doesn't really make sense with her being the knight, right, necessarily. And that's still kind of true. Still waiting to see what that was all about.
Because some people still think she's in the code for whatever reason, even though it's written like it was years ago.
I mean, people will be like, oh, she's in the code. That's just wrong. You're just misinterpreting that completely. Yeah.
Death Knighters were saying this is like, find her was like not literal back in the day. I know you think it's like not referring to the events in game, it's referring to what has already happened and Kris found her.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it was just meant to be teasing regarding the idea that Des was lost and that people were looking for her, right? Which comes into play in the plot in the sense that Kris did find her before the start of the game, and then they decided to do this big night conspiracy thing.
Yeah.
But like the other big thing that people would argue against in connection to the whole find our lost girl stuff was the idea that, oh well, if she's trapped and lost in the like the shelter in like the darkness or whatever, how is she walking around town making fountains and stuff?
Yeah.
Right. And if she is walking around town making fountains, how come nobody has seen her yet?
Yeah.
That was another big thing for me, definitely, which pulled it down a little bit, even though it was still my number 2 pick.
I don't think that brought it down for me because, you know, she can just go around at night. She can go around at night, you know?
Well, yeah. But the thing is, that wasn't how it was answered. It was actually
later.
Teleporting closets, but we'll get to that later. Yes.
I've seen some people say the knight isn't Des now because Kris wouldn't team up with her because they knew Des then, but not now.
That's silly. That's such a dumb argument.
Yeah, she's a weird Titan creature now. I don't see many people saying that. So that's an interesting direction.
That's another component of this that I have to absolutely give the Death Knighters props for.
Yeah.
One of the more prominent, popular Death Knight theories was that she was like corrupted and like influenced by the Titans. And while that's not necessarily 100% accurate, it's at least 90% accurate. And it's
something like, along those lines.
She came back as like a messed up Titan monster thing. So like, I have to give the Death Knighters props on that one. You were just completely correct on that angle, right? That one theory, that was just right.
I think it's really
obviously
funny.
I have to give Death Knighters the props on it. They were picking up on stuff more. Yeah.
I think it's funny that this one isn't even a night theory that did the best, you know? This isn't really like a way to judge the quality because then, I don't know, more people would be like, oh, Deltarune sucks. Maybe some people will be angry about it, you know, Rudy Nighters or something. I don't know.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, despite me being like the Kris Knight guy, being the most diehard Kris Knighter of all time, even I am like not at all shocked that we ended up getting, you know, this Kris Des multi-night stuff. Because not only did I consider it in the past before chapter 2, right? This is still like super similar to what I thought we were doing anyway. Kris the Knight because they're trying to save Des, but also Des is going to come back as some fucked up zombie thing, and that's going to be like a big component of it. Yes, that's all true, but Kris isn't looking for Des as the Knight. Kris has already found her, and now she's the Knight, and now they're both doing the Knight plan together. The only difference between like what we got and like my main theory is like the order of events, and like yes, that does change the plot a good amount. But I'm happy that we got Death Knight in the way that we did specifically. story, because I really love the relationship dynamic between Kris and Des and them working together. I really, really love that.
Yeah, I like that too. That was something I guessed around with, like them being closer and such. It's interesting. I like that it's getting this much attention already.
Yeah,
I wonder what it's gonna turn into.
Yeah, because that was like what I really wanted to see out of this game, was for Kris and Des's dynamic to be really interesting and for their relationship to be like the centerpiece of the plot. And in what we ended up getting, it was even more of that than what I wanted. Yeah.
Kris Knight. Ooh, this is the most infamous Night Theory of them all. Look at the ratings. Look at how super weird they are. You see, like, it's a little bit all over the place, but you see it kind of didn't do too terribly, but it also has like a bunch of 1s and also a bunch of 10s, you know? Well, all of these Night Theories have like a bunch of 1s because this is a part of the game people felt really strongly about. So you're gonna have some people be like, no, there's no way this will be true. Absolutely no. So before we dive into the theory, I just want to talk about the ratings and such before we dive into the theory. This is one of the Night Theories of like an actual character with one of the highest ratings so far, you know? Technically, I think it had the highest average, but Vessel and Alvin Knight has like more 6, 7s, and 8s. Now, the 10 out of 10 votes, those didn't come just from people
overrating and people
being like, it is Kris Knight, it is canon.
Like one might assume.
It also came from like multi-nighters. There were plenty of text responses going like, not the night, a night. That's why even some negatively rated Night Theories we'll get to later actually had a few positive votes. And also because some people were stupid. Anyways, removing people who thought multi-night was good. This is, I cut it down by like taking the multi-night theory, not team up multi-night, the other one, and just cutting down the ones who have given it a specific rating. And you can see it still has that weird flat, weird middle, and then you have those bumps on one end and the other. So it doesn't really change, really. And the opposite thing also happens. You know, if you take people who thought multi-night was good, then the Kris Knight ratings stay exactly the same. So it's not really one way or the other, you know? This is just what people thought about Kris Knight, you know? Do you have any thoughts on their ratings or anything?
I would say they're not that surprising that they're kind of like this, because that's just kind of how the theory always was. I do feel like, I don't know how much this theory was like boosted by the fact that the person who made the survey was like a vocal Kris Knighter.
It didn't change much. Without Kris Knight bias, this is without Kris Knight bias. I asked if they had watched my Kris Knight video. Didn't change much. There were multiple Night Theories that did well, you know?
That's true.
In the controversial theories video,
when people were asked what
the worst theory ever was, Kris Knight ended up in the top 10 along with like shit like Ralsei is a girl, Azrael is dead, and Third Entity, when this was literally like this
and homophobic Toriel.
When this was literally like the second most correct Night Theory. It was higher than Papyrus Knight and even like anti-Kris Knight.
It wasn't just the second most correct Night Theory. It was also a Night Theory that had already been functionally revealed, right?
It's anti-Kris Knight did not even get that many votes at all, which, you know, it kind of shows how strong the hatred was to this theory compared to like people being like the other way around of criticizing the hate towards the theory and being like, no, it is Kris Knight. Because the hate for this one was really extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. There was no other theory in the fandom that had like a hate campaign, like an entire campaign and movement dedicated to trying to debunk it and like hating on it, right?
I do feel like
dozens of like Kris Knight debunk videos on YouTube and stuff.
Though, as time went on though, in the Chapter 2 era, people did seem to be a bit more open to it. So you can't find people being like, well, it's possible, but I don't like it. Or, well, I like it, but it's not that possible. Or anything along those lines, you know? Because of people like Spooky Dude, or you, a little bit, I guess.
Yeah.
And me, because I made a video, you know? It's nice to have perspective, you know? But people act like this was completely wrong, you know? Like I said, second most correct Night Theory. And also people leaving comments being like, oh, this was totally wrong. Right when the chapter came out, people were like, oh,
this aged badly. This is so bad," without watching the video or hearing what people had to say.
Or even like taking in the full grasp of the new chapter, right? It's just like Death Knight appeared, and then they're like, "Oh, Kris Knight's wrong," ignoring the whole Kris Knighting scene, of course, because they hadn't gotten there yet.
People, you know, we'll learn more about the game as we're like talking about it, because there are a lot of different secrets and dialogue and stuff like that. So it's weird to just immediately go to any video for that matter and just leave a comment like that.
Yes,
it's weird. Parts of the fandom still feel like the Chapter 2 fandom. You have like awful night theories, like anti-Death Knight. People are just trying to like have one big obvious one to go against, you know?
In a lot of ways, it does kind of feel like how Death Knight is being treated now is kind of like what Kris Knight should have been treated like in retrospect. But also, I do understand how the massive Kris Knight hate train got rolling, because how people felt is that, like, in order for them to propose any of their other Knight alternatives, like Alvin Knight, for example, they had to first debunk Kris Knight, because Kris Knight was already functionally revealed. So they had to be like, no, that's not actually a Kris Knight reveal. That's just a red herring. The entirety of Chapter 3 will be filler, and this is what we're actually doing in terms of the story. Right? That's what they all argued. They all had to argue that Chapter 3 would be meaningless filler that would not actually advance the plot and would just be like character development for Kris. And then also we're going to go to the church, and then it's going to be Alvin Town, and then stuff will happen, I guess.
Boom.
It's very odd.
We'll get to Alvin Knight. There were a lot of different points that were wrong, but the one thing you could like say 100% was right was that solo Kris Knight was definitely a red herring, you know? But there were elements to the red herring that basically nobody really saw coming, you know?
I don't even know if I would agree that it was a red herring, because it's like, if you choose to interpret it like, oh, well, this is just pure multi-Knight, then it's just like, here's the Kris Knight reveal. It's meant to recontextualize stuff. And then, boom, here's the Death Knight reveal. It recontextualizes stuff. I do think it's a little messy in how Toby did it, because it, like, the Chapter 2 ending recontextualizes the Chapter 1 ending, and then the Chapter 3 ending unrecontextualizes it, but also keeps the recontextualization to a degree.
That's what I mean. That's why I do think it is a red herring, and most people thought it was a red herring back in the day. And I've seen some people be like, it was never a red herring. You were just stupid for thinking that it was Kris, and you were 100% wrong, you know?
I think the game especially with the context of Chapter 3, very much definitely wanted and expected everybody to just think Kris was the Knight.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And people were right that the game wanted you to think that it was just Kris, you know?
Yes.
Even though there was more going on.
Yeah, Toby wanted to have his twists on top of twists, right? Yeah. Because like we were saying, the hate campaign was enormous. People were looking for anything they could to try and debunk Kris Knight. So there was like a million different arguments, which is why talking about Kris Knight in any positive lens was so obnoxious and insufferable in the Chapter 2 days. If you were like, hey, I think the Chapter 2 ending is a real plot twist and is going to advance the story, and it isn't just bullshit, red herring that Chapter 3 is just going to be filler, you then had to first dodge the 10 million knives being thrown at you from the anti-Kris Knighters. There was a million like arguments being thrown at you, right? And you had to like fucking counter all of them before you even got to the part where you talked about positively with Kris Knight, and people would just never listen to what the Kris Knighters would have to say, which is how you have all these people who like can't even recognize the fact that what we got was a Kris Knight variant, that we got Kris Death's multi-Knight, because they're so trenched in their anti-Kris Knight, their Kris Knight hatred, they can't even be willing to, they're not even willing to give any credit to Kris Knighters where it's due, right?
That's where it reminds me, you know, you can't really be like, oh, this is like Kris Knight, because then they'll be like, oh, you're just coping, you just want to be correct even though you're 100% wrong. And if you're like, if you, I don't know, complain about it or something, they'll be like, oh, you're just mad what you believed it didn't turn out to be true, you know? No matter which way you go, you were wrong 100%.
Or they'll go back and say, well, Kris Knight was basically mostly correct anyway. What do you have to complain about? And it's just like you literally just can't win with these people no matter what you say, which is why I'm sure no matter what we say, we're going to get a bunch of hate comments
That's a
in
good
this
thing.
video.
That's a good thing, you know, and
I don't know,
good
it's
comments, engagement, or whatever.
And that's another thing, was like, because of what we got, so you got the whole element of Kris Knighters being like, yeah, fuck yeah, Kris Knight was pretty much right, we won. And then the anti-Kris Knighters also going, yes, fuck yeah, Kris Knight is dead, you know?
Can we like talk about the different points now?
Yes.
Or a bunch of points that were wrong. One of them was like
King
would recognize the Master Knight. Queen would recognize the Master Knight. For King though, that was like wrong. Because we know that King never even met the Knight.
Yeah, that was one of the primary arguments people made. Kris Knighters were like, no, they never met the Knight. And then chapter 4 comes along and it's like, yeah, King never met the Knight. So that one's confirmed for the Kris Knighters. That point was right.
People were also like, oh, the story's moving too fast. Which is so dumb because the Knight showed up in chapter 3 and nobody expected that. And we also got a lot of stuff.
That was always a stupid argument.
Yeah, people just don't understand like
pacing,
that any storytelling or whatever. Oh, this kind of story could be good. No, it can't be. It's bad. It's too fast. And also like people not understanding what dramatic irony is.
And the twist not being revealed to other characters.
We also got a lot of stuff a lot faster. You know, I feel Des, Carol, Gaster, the prophecy, the player, Ralsei. It does make sense in hindsight that we're getting a lot of this much. Yeah, I guess.
One anti-Kris Knight point that I want to acknowledge and stuff is specifically the argument that people made regarding some of Chris's actions, right? Specifically, Kris backing away from the closet in chapter 1, or Kris telling the kings that their world is in danger, or undying about the Dark Worlds. Yeah.
Which is silly, because if Kris was scared about the world ending, then they wouldn't even be making the fountain for chapter 3 to begin with, because it would end the world. Are you fucking stupid, Kris? Kris is not. Kris is crossing a line to begin with, so they aren't scared. There's more going on there.
Yeah, and like the point about the backing away from the closet specifically being, oh well, they're scared of the dark closet, therefore they can't be the Knight. My argument for that was always, oh well, Kris is just acting in order to get Susie to go inside, and I can say with confidence that is now 100% confirmed to be what's going on.
Yeah, I was arguing that it was like gastric trauma, and Kris was scared of that or whatever. I don't know.
No, they were just acting.
Well, I'm just saying what I believed in back then. And there was TV Friends. TV Friends, I remember that? That was a lovely one. Kris just wanted to have fun. It does seem like Kris is warmed up to some parts of like the Dark Worlds, you know? Doesn't it seem like that a little bit? I've seen some people point that out.
Yeah. When you bring up the TV dialogue, the pro Kris Knight evidence back in the day, right? You'd bring up the TV dialogue and it's like, oh, well, Chris's fountain was premeditated. They planned this out. It was so weird seeing people like try to argue against that. You're like, oh, well, that just doesn't matter. You know, it's like, that was just a mistake on Toby's part or something.
A retcon, basically. Oh, Toby forgot.
Yeah.
That was weird.
Yeah. No, that was deep lore. That was like the big thing where I'm like, well, Chris's fountain was premeditated, so all the whole like Kris just wanted to have a fun adventure with Susie, that doesn't make any sense, especially with Snowgrave.
I saw people still being like, well, it's still possible that they aren't a Knight. They just know a lot of stuff with the plot and such, you know?
The thing with me is I'm surprised that like Kris Knight +1, right? The name of the correct answer, right? Again, wasn't a more popular theory. I'm surprised because you'd think with like the anti-Kris Knight hatred that at least more people would come around to the objective points regarding the pro evidence for Kris Knight and being like, well, okay, they did kind of make a fountain. Going back on this plot twist completely would be kind of ass.
Some of the fan art I've seen is more faithful to what's going on.
It's like you would think that like, oh, with all these like really hard pro Kris Knight points, that people would at least like, okay, well, maybe Kris isn't the only Knight. Because it's like, if you're so hell-bent on like some anti-Kris Knight point that you're not willing to move on, you'd think that they'd be like, okay, well, maybe Kris is like working with the real Knight. I'm so surprised that theory wasn't more popular. Like I said, I only ever saw Kris Knighters argue for it, because the other multi-Knight theories that would also include Kris didn't have Kris also working with the Knight.
Yeah, I saw that a lot. That's what I mentioned with the un-Knight.
Because like those multi-Knight theories were decently popular, but like the correct multi-Knight theory of Kris working with the Knight, that wasn't.
Yeah, a lot of people thought that Kris learned to make how to make the fountains by Queen, like her speech, which was also fucking wrong. It was premeditated, you know.
Yeah, because that was like a big point regarding that, is that, oh, well, Kris just learned how to make fountains in Queen, and that's why they're doing it. And they just want to have a fun adventure with Susie. And then I would point out, no, that's not true. They plugged the TV in between chapters. This was obviously premeditated. They obviously know what they're doing. There was also the element. I would prefer to leave the Closet Night discussion for the Closet Night segment. There's something else I was going to say about this, but I don't remember it now.
It's fine. You can make a comment about it. There also was one argument. Well, it was a Kris Knight argument that casual players would be most comfortable with Kris Knight and not like some secret character you've never heard of in the background that has no mandatory encounter.
Yeah.
You know, if I cut it down to people who like said they were barely in the fandom and they weren't into theories, then, you know, it's still kind of a little bit all over the place and like a bunch of once, but you know, you can't see that. I don't know, both very in the middle, a lot of them, but Kris did the best here technically. It's hard to like cut down with the sample size and also the fact that this is a niche survey. You know, casual players aren't gonna do this survey, so it's kind of hard to trim it down to casual players, you know, but it could show that on a wide scale that there were some people who were like, oh, this sucks balls.
Even outside the theory community.
Yeah, I basically just used the questions at the end of every category about if they cared about it or the knowledge they had. Oh yeah, when using that, there the results were worse in terms of finding something interesting to look at and talk about. This is also like a sample size of like under like 200 people, so keep that in mind. It's really small, so I don't know, it's not like the most accurate thing in the world. Okay, there's one final part about this theory I do think we can talk about. Even though basically what we got is like
a Kris Knight variant.
There have also been discussion about it technically still being true, you know, in chapter 2 definition. In the sense that Kris made the previous fountains, you know? We could have like Kris and Des switching between who'll make the fountains. Des, Castletown, Kris, Card Kingdom, Des, Cyberworld, Kris, TV World, Des, Church, and then Kris again for like Flower Shop, because we even see them like jump out the window and such, you know?
I would say the whole taking turns is both still multi-night, exactly like how we've been talking about it, and also is decently plausible.
Yeah, it is plausible.
I don't know if I say likely, but like Kris making Card Kingdom definitely has some points and evidence towards it.
Or the Grand Fountain. I've seen some people talk about either of them, like, oh, it could be this one, no, it could be this one. But like, I'm bringing this up because like people are saying that people are like, oh, Kris didn't make any of those earlier fountains, but you know, these theories kind of question whether or not that's even true, you know? Yeah, instead of like Asgore making it like a lot of people think it is, it's like Kris instead, you know? I don't think it's Asgore because of my Goner Maker theory list. Anyways, there's also like the theory that the Knight does the knighting and Kris does the fountain making. Des is basically left untouched. Basically, the Roaring Knight is like literally Kris or some weird shit like that. So the chapter 2 fountains creation makes complete sense. The chapter 1 makes complete sense. And then you have like the chapter 4 one, which is weird because like when could they have made the fountain at church? And you have the brief period of time when Kris takes out the soul and throws it in the box, and before we're able to like get into the kitchen and see what's going on there, Kris could have like walked out like the door, like right up with the piano outside there, gone to the church and made the fountain and come all the way back.
I think when the lights go out and we're in the basement would be more likely of a time for Kris to do it.
Okay, because that was
meant to be the case.
Okay, that makes more sense because the one
I think the bigger problem with that is Gerson existing and how he does. Yeah.
Wait, why is that?
Because the whole reason why we know 100% that it's Death Knight is because Gerson was Dess's teacher before she went missing. And so she's the only knight candidate who could have reasonably had a relationship with Gerson that he would manifest as a teacher figure.
Okay, that's interesting. That does definitely put a bit of a temper on that. Yeah. But I'm just pointing
Kris
it out.
making the chapter 4 fountain, it's not even an issue of could they have gone to the church to make it. Because like we said, they could have made it when the lights were out. It's a matter of could they have reasonably made a Gerson Dustner, right? It's like all the other fountains are like based on the shared mutual will between Kris and Dust. That kind of works for either or. But then you got the Gerson Dustner.
There's also like prophecy swapping that Kris was the knight before Death, and then I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I mean,
know
that one's pretty reasonable because that one doesn't
Yeah.
actually like change the story.
No.
I
No,
think the
it-
idea of like Kris was going to be the knight, and then like
Mm.
Death, volunteered as tribute sort of
Yeah.
deal.
I know you believed that like the vessel was the original knight,
I think
and
it's
then
possible.
like Kris took the place.
No. Vessel is the original cage.
No, back in the chapter 2 days.
Yeah, the vessel was the cage. Vessel was always the cage. Kris was always the knight, even in chapter 2 days.
Vessel was
You're
the
misremembering
original-
the theory. The theory was that Kris was the knight and that the vessel was the player character. Kris
Oh.
took the vessel out of
Okay.
the story completely and took their
Okay.
role while still maintaining their original role as the knight.
Oh, okay.
That was the theory was.
Okay, that's interesting. And then there's also time traveling Kris Knight, which we're not going to talk about because it's bad.
Kris Knight is fucking stupid.
Light year
Fucking
bullshit.
stupid. It's an insult to Kris Knighters everywhere.
Yeah,
At least do
I
the
don't-
shadow projection hand puppet Death Knight third entity shit. At least
Or-
that's slightly
no.
more reasonable.
or just Kris does the fountain making, or just something simple as that, Leave Death untouched. I want Death to still be there. That's all I really ask for.
My only problem with Kris not making the chapter 2 fountain is really just that the chapter 1 ending with Kris pulling out the knife is kind
Yeah.
of lamer if they don't make the fountain.
Yeah.
Besides that, it's like whatever.
I know some people said that, Kris Knight would have been banned writing, but like we can't confirm that because we never got that. Like with the survey, it's not an indicator of quality because Death Knight wasn't even the Knight theory that did the best.
Yeah, I feel like the people who said that did not engage enough with Kris Knight in any meaningful good faith to discern whether or not it would actually be good writing or not. Because like the arguments for their perceived contradictions and like plot holes or whatever with Kris Knight are demonstrably less than like what we actually got in the game, to be honest. Is there anything else you want to say regarding Kris Knight?
Future Shiruba here. I can't believe I didn't say anything about this at all. We talked about it in the Kris video, but people really didn't like mischaracterizations of Kris because of how Kara and such was mischaracterized. It's like, evil genocider, and the player had no effect on the plot, So because chapter 2 made it really clear that Kris and the player was different, some people definitely took it to the extreme of Kris being super innocent and stuff like that. Some of the factors on how Kris Knight was viewed absolutely came from this. The Sans, I remember you are memes, that kind of comes from the same thing. Of people looking back on something and trying to improve how people view the game. Whatever.
No.
I think I have like one last word I want to say on the topic.
Okay.
Just to say like my final piece regarding the Kris Knight stuff and the multi-knight stuff in general. Back in the chapter 2 days, I pretty confidently said, I think it's either Kris Knight or it's Kris multi-knight.
You said that.
And those were the only two theories that I both thought would be good narratively that could work at all. And lo and behold, we got Kris multi-knight. So I think I stand by that statement.
Okay. Mayor Knight. Carol Knight. But we didn't know her name back then, so it was just Mayor Knight. This one's kind of in the middle, but it was one of the more popular candidates. 5th highest rated Knight candidate of like an actual character.
Yeah.
I guess it's like the 3rd most correct one. It's unclear whether or not, clearly the game wants you to think that she's the Knight with the red herring and she's the red herring now. The katana and everything. Her coincidentally coming home after like the phone call. It's unclear if she's the phone caller or not and stuff like that. And she is she has this hometown conspiracy. She might be working with Kris and Des. Maybe not. But, I do feel like this one can get points,
Yeah. It's not clear as of yet to what degree she's working with the Knight, if at all. That's still up in the air. We're waiting on chapter 5 to answer that. So, if that is true, she is masterminding it, then yeah, I definitely would give Mayor Knighters at least a 4th point if Kris Knighters are getting half a point.
They all. I think they all can get a point. Everyone else, no. Everyone else was.
It's like I could be like very actually about it and be like, well, Death Knighters weren't actually right because they weren't guessing Kris Dust multi-knight specifically. They didn't guess Chris's involvement in the Knight fan, so therefore their theory was all wrong. But I think that's pretty disingenuous. And not really fair to anybody.
I think I was definitely a little unfair towards Carol Knight for basically most of the chapter Chapter 2 era, or basically all of it, yeah. I saw this one as just another Disney twist villain-esque candidate for a while, but there was like one Mayor Kris Knight video that came out pretty late. Did pretty well though. I was like, okay, maybe it's not that bad, you know. I was overhating. It had like connections to other characters, you know. She was a holiday, could have had the motivation of looking for Death, you know. It was better than Alvin Knight, but you know, Death Knight was right there. Death Knight is better than Carol Knight. Mayor Knight did do worse than Death Knight, you know.
On the survey.
Yeah, I would say Mayor Knight for me personally, back in the day, was very much like, I guess, third place overall. But it was a pretty big gap between her and Tess.
I had Bezel.
It also kind of felt like, to me, my perception of it was kind of like the Knight theory that people believed in when they ran into too many problems with every other Knight theory. They discredited every other Knight theory in a sense, right? They didn't believe in Kris Knight for any number of reasons, right? They were like, well, Des is the Finder Lost girl, so it can't be Des. They were like, Alvin doesn't have a character portrait, so it can't be Alvin. Vessel Knight doesn't make any sense, so it can't be the Vessel sort of thing. Therefore, I've run down the list of every possible Knight candidate, and the only one I found that doesn't have like a major contradiction is the Mayor. So therefore, it's the Mayor. You know, that's how it felt like to me.
I'm kind of surprised Mayor Knight wasn't the one that did the best. I feel like that should have been the most popular theory, and I would have been more okay with like, I don't know, whatever stupid discussion we had. This one's definitely still very much likely, I guess, even if it's
the thing is
a low chance with this one. And I'd kind of just prefer it to be Des, you know.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, back in the Chapter 2 days, right, Mayor Knight didn't really have any major counter evidence. She also didn't have any evidence in favor of her, really, besides the fact that she has a direct connection to the main cast. Right? Besides that, besides her already implied relationships to, like, you know, the Dreamer family and obviously being, you know, Noelle's mom, she didn't have any evidence in favor of her being the Knight. So
she still barely has any screen time. She still barely has any screen time.
Just so it's clear, I was saying that in the context of her being an important character, not in the context of that being something that debunks her being the Knight. Okay.
She just shows up for 2 minutes. And for 1 second in Chapter 3. And that's about it. Yeah, she's basically the red herring
now
the game wants you to think. I don't understand the red herring. I think it dampens what has come earlier. Like, it's Death Knight. That's what I believe in. That's what I moved over to. Who do you think you're fooling, Toby? I'm not stupid. I know it's just Death. Start just doing this shit for the sake of it.
Yeah, the probably trying to like position Carol Knight as like a red herring in Chapter 4. It feels very weird, especially since like you immediately run into the major contradiction of how could she appear at the church if she was just at her house and we left before her, and also she didn't seem to leave at all.
Mayor Money Tunnels.
She
could have made it before she came home.
Just wait for the twist where Mayor Money Tunnels is real, but also it's still Des that's using them.
That'd be so fucking funny.
It's gonna be true. I'm telling you, that's actually just what's gonna happen.
I do think the red herring kind of annoys me, not because it's like, but this is the thing that should be true, as if it's like the theory I like the most. No, it's just the opposite, really. I don't know, why is it in the game? I'm not gonna be fooled by it again, you know. That reminds me of a clip I came across. I was shared of like a streamer. It's not English, but he comes across it and he's like, oh, the katana, it could be Mayor, and then he's like, wait, no, it's bullshitting, it's so on the nose.
Nessuno dice niente riguardo la spada gigante?
Ehi, aspetta. Il Knight? No, allora basta, no, ci stanno baitando. No, cioè fa talmente il giro che non è il Knight al 100%. Ma dai.
Well, yeah, he basically says it's so on the nose that it goes around the other way to just debunk that Carol is the Knight. Yeah, it is just kind of bullshit, you know, if someone playing it just blind can just see through it like that. I don't think I even thought about Carol when I came across the katana. I was just like, okay, a big sport. I don't remember. I would have to go back and see if I said anything out loud on the streams I did. Maybe I did. I don't know.
It feels like like the Carol Knight red herring can only really work at all if you're just not paying that much of attention and you don't really think about Des as a character that exists within the narrative. If you're not really reading the dialogue and not like if you're not compartmentalizing the dialogue and you're only looking at the visuals in a sense, right? Just forget that Des exists, despite the fact that there's an entire segment dedicated to rummaging around her room, right?
Yeah. Yeah, some people think that she's just in the code. It can't be that. She's in the code, you know?
The Mirror Knight red herring is like, it's not worked at all, even the slightest. I've only seen like literally one person actually believe in Carol Knight and in like the new chapter days, right? Like I've seen more people unironically believing in Rudy Knight and Azrael Knight than I see
because people hate women.
Carol Knight.
People
It's
don't
true.
like women. Yeah.
True. Okay, I'll say my last words on it. I would say back in the chapter 2 days, this was a respectable theory. It was somewhat reasonable to a degree. I would say it was reasonable specifically in the context of Kris Carol multi-knight the most, because that was a reasonable theory and seems to be somewhat true on some level, even if Carol's not the knight, with the whole triple truces stuff.
It's complicated.
And her potentially being the mastermind if the triple truce stuff is like less soon. It's complicated. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But,
now there's some stuff I still want to talk about, like text responses and different points I remember. One text response was, "See Alvin Knight theory. This one's at least slightly more plausible, but still has no artistic basis." It's really funny. I guess that's kind of how I felt back in the days, but like I said, you know, kind of realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm a little silly here. It's a lot better than Alvin Knight. Remember the pun? Nightmare?
Yes.
Nightmare?
Yes. Mayor. Nightmare.
Yeah.
Yes. It was very pun based.
Yeah.
That also reminds me of the time when people just forgot. Like there was an entire era of the chapter 2 days where people just forgot the knight used the knife to make the fountain, and I saw a ton of people argue that the Mayor Knight used her fountain pen to make the fountains.
Yeah.
And
that
it
was one
just
of
like,
them. That was one of the options. We're gonna get to a stupider one later. A really fucking stupid one. Deltarune fans can't read, and I bet there's some people who don't want to admit it. Or maybe, I don't know, I assume some people will be like, this is an entertaining video. I like what this goat and scroll are saying. But I feel like, I don't know, that's gonna be received since we're like a small little channel and such compared to if we were bigger. I don't know. Back on topic. Another text response. "I owe a lot of people money if Mare is the knight. And honestly, she works better as a counter knight." A counter knight.
like a narrative foil to the knight, where the knight is like
Maybe.
the Dark World antagonist and the Mayor is like a Light World antagonist. And I would agree. Yeah. And it does seem like she is playing more or less that role within the narrative.
Because if she's not a part of like the knight team, she might be aware of like the knight running around. She doesn't know that it's Des, you know? I've heard that idea thrown around. You know, she's still trying to find her, you know? That was a common motivation for Kris Knight, and that was like a common motivation here that was brought up. A weird point I saw against this theory was that I think it goes against her characterization. Mayor Holiday seems protective. Why would she risk her entire town? Stuff like that. Or she was a workaholic and she wouldn't focus on making
dark fountains.
Yeah, so she wouldn't be making like dark fountains, you know, because they represent escapism.
I would say that's true. It's kind of why Death Knight works so much better.
Maybe Carol Knight is true. I don't know. You can clip this if it's true. I don't care. Whoa, radical. Carol Knight was right all along. I can't believe it.
That was the correct theories, or the ones that
most likely to be correct based off of scientific analysis.
Yeah, or half correct, you know? They're kind of important to bring up.
At the very least, Kris Knight is true.
Death Knight is true. Just let that one be true as well. But yeah, if you're interested in more of these night theories, like the really bad ones, like Papyrus Knight, if you want to know what people thought about that, then you can check if it's already out, or
because
sub.
Because the videos are chopped up into winners and losers. So, you know, if you're wondering where Alvin Knight stands, he's in the loser bracket.
But the video will come out in a couple of days. So go check him out if you really want to. Yeah, you can't just put Des alone, you know? I feel like the video will age badly. I don't know. I want these videos to be as watchable in newer eras.
I don't know. It seems like people aren't really watching the videos now, to be honest. I don't know. It is what it is.
Whatever. It is what it is.
This is quite the hefty survey. We still had plenty to go through, but I do feel a little bit sorry for everyone that had to go through that many theories. Well, it's a good thing we're doing another one, and it's much shorter. Yeah, that's right. This time, you get to rate chapters 3 and 4 of theories. Theories like Carol Knight, Neil Woody theory. Well, why did you stop being green? It's in the description and the pinned comment. So I recommend you do it right now. It'll make me very happy. I spent all this time, and I made this just for you.
If you're interested in seeing more from the survey, then check out the videos from specific categories already out within the playlist, or subscribe for more of these, or other videos. Or you can subscribe for our personalities. I guess that's possible too. Who wouldn't want more of this goat? I already have enough of him. Well, that's it for me. Check out my Patreon, my Ko-Fi, my other art like music, or Chestnut's channel. Okay, see you later. Bye bye.